Muy buenas tardes. Hola a todos. Mi nombre es Daniel Álvarez. Soy el gerente del Security Operations Center en el CERT de SISAP. El día de hoy los hemos invitado a una nueva charla, un tema muy interesante, para el cual hemos invitado a un gran expositor del tema que hoy tenemos para ustedes. Un poco en seguimiento a las charlas que estuvimos viendo en los días anteriores, hablamos de transformación digital segura, hablamos de incident response y en uno de los temas de respuesta a incidentes importantes, pues se encuentra el tópico acerca de cyber threat information sharing. ¿Qué sucede? Los malos pues comparten información acerca de vulnerabilidades, acerca de exploits, y entonces, ¿por qué nosotros no compartimos información en orden de podernos proteger proactivamente y crear con esto información de inteligencia? El día de hoy, en el opening del Mandiant Cyber Defense Summit, Kevin Mandiant decía que en el último año hubieron más ataques de Zero Day que los últimos 3 años. Las estadísticas también nos dicen que las compañías están sufriendo por lo menos 3 incidentes importantes de seguridad al año. Así que cuando tenemos una brecha de seguridad o un incidente, ¿qué debemos de informar y cuándo? Así que el día de hoy vamos a intentar responder esas preguntas con nuestro invitado especial. Y bueno, antes de continuar, los invitamos entonces a que nos acompañen a ver nuestro video introductorio del CERT de SISAP. Así que volvemos con ustedes en unos minutos.
SISAP, Sistemas Aplicativos. Durante este tiempo, hemos incursionado en muchas áreas de la tecnología de la información, liderando el mercado a través de la innovación, calidad y servicio al cliente, ofreciendo los siguientes servicios. Arquitectura. RIF-DR, equipo de respuesta a incidentes forenses Data Recovery. Ingeniería y soporte, PMO. SOC, consultoría, outsourcing, capacitaciones y Customer Success. Realizamos operaciones en distintos países como Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panamá y República Dominicana. Además, nuestros clientes están situados en Estados Unidos, México, Centroamérica, Colombia, Ecuador, Perú, Chile, Brasil y otros países. Nuestro SOC en Guatemala se sitúa en el edificio Forum Zona Viva. Además, contamos con un segundo SOC en la ciudad de Panamá. Actualmente SISAP está certificado como CERT por parte de la Universidad de Carnegie Mellon, que a través de su software, Engineering Institute, nos ha dado entrada a su red de CERTs. Nuestro personal cuenta con más de 70 certificaciones de SIEM, Malware Reverse Engineering, Penetration Testing, Forensics, Incident Response, entre otras. SISAP, con más de 150 ingenieros trabajando para sus socios comerciales, con más de 1000 certificaciones, alianzas estratégicas con Nova Coast, IBM, Verizon, contributor de Verizon, en donde SISAP contribuye generando reportes e información local recolectada, alimentando el reporte de este año, poniendo en el mapa la región de Centroamérica y el Caribe, que no habían tenido datos significativos anteriormente. También estamos certificados por FIRST, que es una confederación internacional de equipos confiables de respuesta a incidentes informáticos, que manejan cooperativamente incidentes de seguridad informática y promueven programas de prevención de incidentes. SISAP, Sistemas Aplicativos.
Bienvenidos de vuelta. Un par de instrucciones antes de continuar. El audio de esta conferencia va a ser principalmente en inglés. Recuerden que nuestra presentación el día de hoy tiene traducción automática. Tenemos el canal en español para los que así lo necesiten. Y también no olviden que tenemos un panel de preguntas y respuestas para los que desean hacer alguna cuestión para nuestro invitado. Así que en este momento nos vamos a mover al audio en inglés. Hello, Patrick. Good evening, Patrick.
Hello, Daniel. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you very well. So,
Great.
in order to introduce our guest, we have today Patrick Coughlin. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Georgetown University. He also holds an MBA from Stanford University. And he is the head of intelligence platform at Splunk. Patrick was co-founder and CEO of TrueStar, a cyber intelligence management platform that was acquired by Splunk in 2021. Prior to TrueStar, Patrick led cybersecurity and counterterrorism teams for the US government and multinational corporations. That's a very good CV that we have for our guest today. So in order to begin, Patrick, let's discuss this main question. What do we mean when we talk about information sharing or cyber threat data sharing?
Yeah, well, great. Well, first of all, Daniel and team at SISAP, thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be here. We've had the pleasure of working together, and I'm a big fan of the work that you all do. And it's a joy for me to talk about intelligence sharing and information sharing with anybody who will listen. So when we say information sharing and cyber threat intelligence sharing, what we're really talking about is really three types of data. It often starts with an event or an alert or a case or a ticket or a suspicious email. So you have sort of the event level data. And then if you click into that one layer deeper, there's often observables or indicators. These are the technical signatures that indicate malicious activity, IP addresses, URLs, hashes. And then of course you've got TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures that have been defined by MITRE that can help a company and incident responder understand who the threat actor may be behind a particular suspicious attack. And this whole movement, Daniel, around cyber threat intelligence sharing started about 20 years ago, a little bit more than 20 years ago. In the United States, there was a presidential directive in 1998. It was presidential directive number 68 that came out, and it created these organizations called ISACs and ISAO. Some of you folks on the line may have heard of these. These are information sharing and analysis centers. These were formal communities that were stood up and mandated by the US government in each industry. There was one for the financial services. There was one for the IT sector. There was one for the healthcare sector. There was one for critical infrastructure. And these organizations were responsible for facilitating intelligence sharing across their member companies. And that was about 20 some years ago. And the way that these organizations worked is they were often email listservs, at the time. But when we look at how this has evolved over the last 20 years, we see all new types of communities and groups that come together to share intelligence. I know you all at SISAP have built a community for cyber threat intelligence sharing, but we see them that have gone beyond those initial groups, and now we see them forming at the city level. There's an intel sharing community here where I live in the city of Los Angeles, where public sector security operations centers, the SOCs in the different counties, will share intelligence with the private sector companies the banks, the media companies, and their security operations centers. We see them happening amongst a group of hospitals in the Pacific Northwest here in the United States. Some of the largest hospital chains that have been victims to ransomware. There's about 7 of them that have just come together and said, you know what, now we're going to share intelligence. And so we've seen the types of communities grow internationally as well as in the US. And we've seen the types of data expand beyond just technical indicators to include threat actors and TTPs. And we've seen the mechanism for information sharing evolve as well over the last 20 years, where before it may have been a cybersecurity analyst in a SOC writing an email about an attack to a buddy of his that he had met at the Black Hat conference and saying, have you seen this before? To now increasingly automated and integrated ways to programmatically share threat intelligence directly from the tools where teams are living to these communities of peers, partners, and supply chain. And one other thing I'll just say is, and then we can get to some more questions, is when we think about information sharing, it's important to think about who we're sharing with. And sometimes we think, well, if I'm going to share, that means it's public information. But with many companies that we work with, we've seen it sort of work like concentric circles, where the security operations center in a bank in the United States can start by sharing intelligence just with the fraud department, or sharing intelligence with a sister company or a portfolio company under the same umbrella. And then it can move beyond the 4 walls of the company to other peers, partners, supply chain members, competitors. One of the most powerful examples of intelligence sharing that I've ever seen is when the cloud providers in the US, AWS, Microsoft, Google, IBM, came together and said, you know what? We keep kicking these bad guys off of our networks, and then all they do is just go on to another cloud provider with the same infrastructure, same credentials, and sign up, have a field day, fire off all their attacks till they get stopped, and then they'll go to the next one. I know we're competitors, but why don't we start sharing intelligence so we increase the costs for these bad guys to keep them from attacking us? And so you had these very competitive players in the United States come together and say, you know what, we don't compete on threat intelligence. So let's share what we have and make it really tough for the bad guys. And it was really the first time, I think, and the only time that you really seen these cloud players partner together in the way that they're doing today.
Thank you, Patrick. And there are organizations which actually do that job. And you were talking about ISACs, and there are some other organizations like CERT, CERT. Which type of information can we share? Is there any framework which can rule on this initiative?
Yeah. So there is not, a universal standard for how to begin sharing, but there are a couple of standards that are very, very helpful, and I'll point out a couple. The first is there's a standard called the Structured Threat Intelligence Exchange, or STIX. Sticks and taxis. Some of you folks may have heard of this. This helps define the data model of information sharing in cybersecurity. And over the last 12 years, it's become accepted as the de facto data model for cyber intelligence sharing. Second is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Helps classify tactics, techniques, procedures, TTPs, that are universally recognized. And so you've got these technical documents that help guide the way of what to share. But really what I find is it's important to start somewhere. sometimes when we work with our customers, they get so overwhelmed with the idea of information sharing. In fact, they'll say, I'm not ready to share. I barely have enough, analysts on my team. I can't get enough budget for my tools. Like, I'm not ready to be a contributor or a sharer of cyber threat information. And we always challenge them and say, well, let's start somewhere. Do you have suspicious emails that are being reported to your security operations center? Do you have employees who are forwarding suspicious emails? Do you have alerts or tickets or cases that are being investigated? These are all things that you can start sharing today. And we advise you to pick one. Often we advise start with phishing emails, start with suspicious emails. And then define your community of who you're going to share those with, or tap into a community that already exists, like the community here that SISAP has and others, and start. One of the things that I've never seen, and I've been doing cyber threat intel sharing for almost 12 years now, I've never seen somebody stop. Once you start and dip your toe in the water of really engaging with a community of peers around intelligence, all that happens is you do more and more and you automate over time, because the return on the investment is a more collective defense. And we are seeing companies realize now that you can't buy all the tools in the world. You can't fund all the partners. You can't have the biggest SOC in the world. That's not going to protect you. What ultimately will protect you in the next decade is how well you are sharing intelligence across an ecosystem of peers and partners. That kind of collective defense is better than any point solution that you may be able to buy today.
As soon as you were explaining this, I was wondering, Patrick, what about confidential information? Usually companies worry about it, and they usually talk about sanitizing data. How can we achieve that in order to be able to share information?
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. And I think it's something that often is an obstacle to intelligence sharing, is concern about privacy or sensitive information. There's a couple of ways to deal with this. Number one, pick a type of data where sensitive information may not exist. So for example, you could say, malicious IP alerts that are coming out of my SIM. There's no customer data in there. It's usually just some raw technical indicators. That's one way around it. Start small so that you're not immediately trying to share the thing that is the most sensitive data that you have in your company. Don't start with that. Be step one. Step two, as you do share more and more information, and there is increasingly a risk of having customer data in there or sensitive proprietary company information in there, there are redaction tools, what we call redaction tools or sanitization tools, that can help you strip that data out automatically so that you don't have to rely on a person to go in and actually find and replace before you share. And these tools are available. There's some on the open source. We've built tools at TrueStar to help make that sanitization more automated and secure.
Thank you, Patrick. And as long as you were also explaining this, I was recalling one of the questions that I have for you, which is under the companies, have you seen a specific role which is the responsible for this process of information sharing?
Yes. In the best companies and in the most mature security operations, I think I've seen that it's everybody's job, in the sense that everybody thinks about, who do I share this with? I'll tell a quick story here. in the intelligence community, which I've spent some time in the United States, before 9/11, the philosophy of information sharing in the US government, in the intelligence community, the CIA and NSA, was, in order for me to share this intelligence with you, you need to give me a need to know. You need to demonstrate that you have a need to know this information before I will share it with you. And it transferred the burden onto the person who wanted the information to prove that they had a need to consume that. And what happened after 9/11, which was a failure of intelligence sharing between the CIA and the FBI, it's documented, it's clear. We had this information, it just, our intelligence agencies weren't sharing intelligence. What happened after 9/11 is the government moved from a need to know to a need to share mentality, which meant that it was the responsibility of the holder of the information, the ticket, the case, the alert, the signal, to think about, as part of their job, who do I need to share this with? Or even to go further, who could I share this with? Who might benefit from this information? And to ask themselves that question as a part of their workflow. And that has changed the entire way that the US government intelligence agencies now work together, compared to in the past, before 9/11, when they were very competitive with each other. And so similarly, in the Enterprise Security Operations Center, we're seeing this idea of dissemination, collect, normalize, prioritize, integrate, disseminate intelligence, being a part of the workflow of your analysts. Now, that being said, sometimes when a company is just starting with intelligence sharing outside of the company, maybe they've joined a community like an ISAC or an ISAO, they will designate a person or two people who will be the liaison, who will be the one who actually shares and participates in the community, who shows up on the calls, who is in the Slack channel or whatever may be used by these communities. And I think that's a very, very good way to start, is to ask your team who wants to do this. And increasingly, people want to do this. The security operations analysts, the security leaders, the SOC leaders that I know want to participate. And so ask your team who wants to do this and see if you get any answers.
Thank you, Patrick. I would like you to emphasize on the following question, because you already mentioned something about it, but who gets the benefits of companies' information in companies sharing information about security incidents, mostly on a region, and I mean Central America, because I think US has their own regulations and laws which rules companies to do so, but in our region, we usually worry about if I am going to get out of the business if I share some type of information, mostly when I talk about breaches, but who gets the benefits?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and it's something that I think about a lot. In the US, sometimes we say, what's the ROI? What's the return on investment for me sharing this? If I'm going to invest my time, my energy, my people, my team in intelligence sharing, what's in it for me? And I think it's important to ask that question. If you're a private sector business and you have responsibility to shareholders, and you're trying to maximize profits, you have to think about ROI. But the research shows, and there's research done by the Cloud Security Alliance, there's research done by the US government, the CISA, Cyber Information Sharing Agency, and the Department of Homeland Security, shows that when you participate in communities, when you share and consume intelligence from these communities, that you increase your resilience, because you will have a more collective layer of defense that goes beyond your tools and your teams. And so participating in these intelligence sharing communities can often give you more maturity in your security operations center. It can help lower premiums in cyber insurance, for example. We've seen that. It can help you detect faster, because when you share with somebody, you're part of a community and you're going to receive data back. The third thing is it can help you enrich what you shared. We often see companies and communities share data before they know actually what happened, when it's still suspicious. Share the events, share the SIM alert or the endpoint alert or the suspicious email. And when they share it, what they see is it correlates with other data that was shared by other members. And they can learn more faster about what is actually going on. So you get immediate enrichment in many cases. In the off chance, in the rare case that you are the first victim, the first person to see that attack, and you share it, you may not get anything back because you were number one. But what will happen is the bad guy who did that, now, instead of being able to go and attack your other peers in Central American banking institutions or healthcare or IT, now because you shared, they can detect, they can defend. And the bad guy who spent money on that exploit now only has one victim instead of 10. And now their ROI went down. They made less money. They're not profitable. And they got to go find a new job. And so even when you are the first victim, there is still value because you are increasing the cost for the bad guys who attacked you and making it harder for them to stay in business and attack you again.
Thank you, Patrick. That was a great explanation. I'm gonna ask you. I have a question from the audience, and I think it is very important to go back a little bit on what we were discussing before. The question is as follows: how would you promote the importance of the confidentiality culture within the company? And I think it is regarding on the privacy and confidentiality aspects, which needs to be taken care before we are able to share information. So how can we promote that culture of confidentiality within the company before being able to share threat data?
Yeah. I think it's important to recognize that privacy and intelligence sharing do not need to be competitive. They can be complementary. You don't need to sacrifice privacy or confidentiality to consume or contribute intelligence about cyber attacks. It is a question we get all the time. I understand the concern, but I have never seen in 12 years a bank, a healthcare, hospital, IT company, cloud provider, some of the biggest companies in the world. I have never seen them getting in trouble for sharing too much cyber intelligence with their peers. It has never happened in the United States that I'm aware of. The only time that companies get in trouble is when they sit on these attacks and when they do not communicate and share. That has happened many times in the United States. And so my only suggestion would just be, don't think about these things as mutually exclusive. They can be complementary.
Do you think that that has something to do with the policies within the organization? I mean, the whole set of security policies the company should establish in order to better treat the whole cybersecurity life cycle. Do you think it has something to do within policies?
I think it has something to do with the policies. I also think it has something to do with the people. look, I'm a security professional. Before I got into intelligence sharing and before TrueStar, I worked in counterterrorism and cyber intelligence in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Iraq, and Syria. I've worked for U.S. government, allied governments. I've worked for large multinational corporations. And when you work in security, there's an element of like secrecy. Sometimes it's good to be the high priest of intelligence, you know, and try to be very proud that only you can understand this information. People who work in security, there's this element of secrecy about it. And so as much as the policies are hard sometimes to think about how do we gel the policies of an enterprise with the practice of intelligence sharing. Every company that I've worked with, and I've worked with the biggest banks in the world, I've worked with banks in Europe that are dealing with GDPR. I've worked with media companies, healthcare, and HIPAA. Policies don't restrict people in intelligence sharing. People do. The policies can evolve, the policies can change, but if the people decide that they want to contribute, that this is important, that this is a priority, I've never seen a policy stop the people.
Great. Going back a little bit on what you were explaining before, you mentioned something about insurance when we talked about the benefits of this approach. And as I said, in our region, we lack of laws and regulation, specifically in Guatemala, which can rule how companies can actually, in the very beginning, protect confidentiality, and we don't have any law which is pursuing cyber bad guys. I mean, so when you were talking about the benefits on the insurance sector, can you let us know how in the U.S. have you treated the legal aspects of cyber threat data sharing?
Yeah. So there's we may have in the U.S. more regulation around the financial services sector, for example. So there are maturity models, these things that are called maturity models that are published by regulatory agencies that say, you know, you are here low on the maturity curve if you do these activities. When you're doing these activities, you're higher. When you're doing these activities, you're higher. And insurance companies use those maturity models to help price insurance premiums. And so what we've started to see in the United States, and I expect will be global, is those maturity models to become increasingly more mature. There are specific line items that say, are you consuming intelligence from a sharing community? And then if you go up further, it says, are you contributing intelligence to a sharing community? And so in order to move up in maturity in the United States, you have to demonstrate that you are an active and engaged member of intelligence sharing. And I expect this to become increasingly international over time, but the research shows these cyber insurance companies and these federal regulatory agencies that the more intelligence sharing that is happening means the more mature and sophisticated and engaged, and therefore the more resilient the company or the organization may be.
Okay, thank you. I have another question for you. Have you seen any time when there is any type of indication on when not to share information, when is not the right moment, the right time to share data? Because we usually get into that question also.
Yeah. I think it's fair to to say anytime that there is customer data, real customer data, present in an alert, a ticket or a case, something that would disclose who your customers are, specific sensitive information about those customers, bank account information, things like this. I think you want to pause and make sure that what you're sharing is relevant. Do I need to have the name of this account holder in this record before I share it? Probably not. Can I keep the malicious IP address in it? Yeah. Can I keep the suspicious file hash? Yeah. Can I keep the URL? Sure. But look at when there's customer data surrounding these different events and records, just taking a discerning eye to what do I really need to share, and what maybe is going to be potentially in violation of some of the privacy or compliance regimes that may be in place.
And now talking about the opposite, when would you say it is the right moment to share incident data? We were discussing last week about the incident response process specifically, so it will be great if you can share with us some ideas on when is the right moment to share data. Yeah. Not just about security incidents. Let's talk about breaches, which is actually something something we are not willing to do.
Yeah. So every country, every jurisdiction has different rules about when you need to disclose a breach. In the United States, I believe it's 72 hours. That you have, and companies here have been sued for violating that, Uber and others in recent news. So often the clock is determined by the jurisdiction. Now that's to comply and to avoid liability. What we encourage our customers and what we see banks and health, hospitals and critical infrastructure doing is moving to the left of the boom, so to speak, sharing earlier in the process. When the ISACs and the ISALs were first created, 2 decades ago, often what was shared was only after it had been packaged, investigated, totally figured out, and then a 4-page write-up in a JIRA ticket was created, and then you export that to PDF, and then you say, "This is it. We've done our after action analysis. We've done our root cause analysis. We've determined that this is what happened. We're closing this ticket in this case." And then, as part of closing it, they would share it. What we're seeing now is because the attacks are moving so much faster and there's so much more automation being used by the bad guys, we're seeing companies and enterprises move to the left, where they're sharing all along the incident response process. A suspicious email comes into the SOC from one of your employees, and that can be enriched and auto-forwarded to a community of other companies to see if there's any correlations, or have you seen this before? And then as it's being investigated, as it's being enriched and triaged and ultimately remediated, then the end state of that, was it good, was it bad, was it a false positive, can be shared back. So sharing earlier, and another great example, the city of Los Angeles, which I talked about before, has a rule set up in their Splunk SIM, and I'm not saying that because I work at Splunk, I just know, where they can share the events 2 times a day to a community of other cities, Dallas, Boston, others. They're similar. They're notable events directly into an enclave or to a repository to be consumed by these other cities, and they've just got it set up to do that. And so they haven't even confirmed whether these were bad or not, but they're using sharing as a way to get enrichment.
Great. And that's the way to create intelligence data, I think, Patrick. So should I or should the company request professional assistance on this approach of cybersecurity information sharing? What do you think about it?
I think there is, look, I think it all depends on the company and sort of what your appetite is for this kind of innovation. But I have seen successful models. The city of Los Angeles is again a great example where they invested in some professional services and some tools early to kickstart the program, to initiate the program, to get it off the ground, right? To set the process, to set the rules, to instrument the tooling. And then it was set it and forget it. And now they run it. And what they've done is they've taken that initial investment and they've managed to build a whole community of other cities around it. So they started the process, they invested early, they got the ball rolling, but then after that, they were able to manage and grow it themselves over time.
Patrick, and actually that was about to be my next question. And what about tooling? What about tooling specifically? Do we need any at the company in order to follow this approach?
Yeah, I mean, we encourage everybody to, don't get into intelligence sharing until you've got your very, very basic fundamentals in place. You've got some detection tools. You've got a SIM or an EDR. You've got a ticketing system or some sort of way to do case management and incident response. And sort of once you've got those sort of bones in place, you can start to think about intelligence as a way to accelerate detection and response. You get your core tools in place, then intelligence becomes really the way you can move faster. And then once you start to step towards intelligence sharing becomes a very, very viable next step. But we do see companies experiment with open source intelligence, with commercial or paid intelligence sources, and then with intelligence sharing. Those are sort of the three ways to leverage intelligence as a way to drive efficiency and effectiveness in detection and response.
Great answer. Thank you, Patrick. Another question that I prepared for you is, we talked about frameworks and so on, but what about technical certifications? Is there any type of certification on the industry so we can say that a specific professional or company is endorsed to do the process of sanitizing data, or so companies can share their threat data?
I would love to see more of this, Daniel. I mean, I think you've hit something that is a bit of a gap in the space. We have, in cybersecurity, we've got certifications for everything. You can get certified for a million different things. And we don't have yet sort of the certification process around intelligence sharing. I don't think that should stop anybody from sharing intelligence, but I do think it's an opportunity for partners and companies like yourselves to come in as a third party and help customers understand, how I get from A to B. I would like to be a sharer of intelligence. Now, what do I do first? What do I do second? How do I know I'm doing the right things? How do I know if I've taken the right steps? How do I do it efficiently? Because I've got a million other things I got to do. But I want to do this because I think it's important for the maturity of the program. And I think relying on third-party vendors, whether that's tools or professional services, can be a fantastic way to give you the comfort that you are making efficient investments along the way as you progress towards maturity for your program.
Thank you, Patrick. I just received another question from the audience. They said, in our culture, our culture in publishing vulnerability events is not good. I suppose they are talking about breaches or security incidents. Rather, it tends to hide those events under the carpet. How can we motivate our clients or people to share without exposing their confidentiality? I think we have discussed something about it, but you may want to discuss this further, Patrick.
Yeah, I hear it all the time. I do. I think in the United States, what we've seen is companies only get over this culture when they try it. And the companies that try it often try it because there is a security leader at that company who says, this is important. I want to be innovative. And that's what ultimately drives it forward. Culture is only made up of people. And I have seen, hundreds of examples of where banks and hospitals and critical infrastructure and energy, before they didn't share. But then when a security leader, it could be a young analyst, or it could be a CISO, can come in and say, I think this is important. I want to start. I want to try. I want to give it a shot. I'm going to start small. And then what happens every time, like I said, is the culture changes because the ROI, the return on investment, becomes clear. As you start to share, you'll get these stories of the wins that happened when you did share. Maybe you helped protect one of your peers. Maybe you helped get some intelligence about what was happening in your network that you couldn't get anywhere else. Maybe you got it faster, right? Maybe you were able to go from detection to response in minutes and hours because you shared it and somebody else said, I've seen this before. We already investigated this. Here's who this is. Here's what you need to do to stop it. And that lets you go from detection to response in hours or minutes instead of days and weeks. And often that can mean real money for enterprises. And the first time you get those wins and you can go and tell your lawyers, your general counsel, your CISO, your CIO, your CEO that I got this because we shared, watch how quickly that culture will change.
Culture, right. Thank you, Patrick. I have another question for you, which is when reporting an attack, is the mitigation method also reported, or do we recommend also to mention the mitigation method that the company used to be reported also?
I think, and this is what the beauty is with some of the tools that are out there today. And I can speak to TrueStar, but there are other tools out there. We allow you through our API, for example, to update a report over time. So you could share a report at the beginning of the incident response process when it's just an alert, when it's just a signal, and there's no remediation. But there's a malicious IP or suspicious IP in it, or a suspicious email address or a suspicious URL, and you can share that. And then over time, as you gather more intelligence, you can build that out automatically. That's what I would recommend. I wouldn't wait until you have fully remediated the incident, you've confirmed that it was validated, it's done, to think about whether you should share or not. You don't have to.
Thank you again, Patrick. The topics we discussed in order to prepare the conversation also consider asking you about the following. Would you say it is recommended to focus some portion of the budget of the company to purchase intelligence data?
So again, I mean, I think every company is a little bit different. What we encourage our customers and partners to do is to think about it like a journey, and you start with your core detection capabilities and processes and tools and people, and then you got your response processes and people and technologies, and then start with intelligence, but start maybe with information sharing. I mean, we see many companies in the US who the first time that they are really leveraging intelligence is when they join an ISAC or an ISAL. Maybe they've played around with some open source information, they've queried and looked things up on VirusTotal with a free account. Of course, do that. But we encourage people to really explore intelligence sharing first before you really go and spend a bunch of money on commercial feeds or commercial sources. Those are very important, but often it's only after you need more sophistication, you need more maturity, and you're seeing more and more outcomes that you have the confidence to invest more in intelligence. If you go too quick and you spend too much money on buying intelligence and then you can't use it, you'll see your budget get cut. So instead, take steps. Use intelligence sharing, use communities first, and then go and spend money on commercial intelligence sources.
So, based on what you just explained, Patrick, would you say that it is possible to use cyber threat data to protect companies proactively?
Absolutely. I mean, we see it every day, dozens of times a day. You can, let's say somebody shares a malicious event. You can take those indicators out of that malicious event, go and hunt for them in your SIM, go and hunt for them on your endpoint. See if you've seen those indicators, and if you have, you can detect on them. If you haven't, you can block them. We see that happening all the time. I mean, there are countless stories of how communities and intelligence sharing have kept businesses open, kept banks open, kept hospitals running because of the value of cyber threat intelligence sharing.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I am reaching those utopia questions, or those wonderland questions we were discussing yesterday, and I'm gonna let you know about it just as follows. What would you describe, or what do you think would it be like the perfect ecosystem for cyber threat information sharing across the nations, across companies?
No, I mean, I think the mission of TrueStar, and even though we've been acquired by Splunk, it's still the mission, and Splunk is adopting that mission, is to ensure that data goes where it needs to go, regardless of borders or technology constraints or political constraints. That ultimately there is signal and there is intelligence, and there are people and companies and tools that need to consume it. And so how do we help facilitate the flow of information in a privacy-preserving way in order to create these more collective defense ecosystems? And so what it looks like for me is exactly what you described. Your customers, the folks that are listening, companies today sit on top of an ecosystem of peers, partners, supply chain vendors, and how well we conduct intelligence across that ecosystem defines our ability to be successful in cyber defense in this next decade. And so what I see is I see banks that are sharing intelligence with other banks, but I see them sharing intelligence with their supply chain partners. I see them sharing intelligence with their go-to-market partners, with their commercial partners, with their technology partners. I see them sharing intelligence with their governments where they're operating. And I see them doing it in an automated fashion. You don't start automated, but you build to an automated fashion. And we see banks here in the US doing this every day. where they try something, it works, they do it manual first, and then they automate it. And the next thing you know, you wake up and we have our security leaders have moved away from being these people who sit in the dark cubicles in the bowels of the basement. And now all of a sudden they're the conductors of intelligence across these ecosystems. And that's where we want to move our security teams together.
Thank you, Patrick. And we are approaching the end of the conference for today. So the last idea we discussed when preparing the conference also was to ask you about a summary of recommendations for cyber threat data sharing. And I asked you to prepare kind of the commandments of information sharing. So please, Patrick, let us know what will they be.
I like the commandments, like I'm the Moses of cybersecurity. This is not the case, but I can tell you. I mean, there's 5 things that we really encourage enterprise security leaders to think about when it comes to cyber threat intel sharing. The first, and this is the most important one, start somewhere. And it starts with you. It starts with whoever's listening to this. It starts with, and it can start with an analyst, it can start with a CISO, it can start with a SOC manager. Start somewhere. Pick a slice of the data that you see, whether that's suspicious emails, phishing emails, endpoint alerts, closed cases from a month ago that you've sanitized. Pick something. Start somewhere. That's number 1. Number 2, join or create a community. There are so many communities out there right now that are leading the way in information sharing. And if you don't see one or you haven't heard of one, maybe that means you need to start one. And it can start small. Start with 1 or 2 peers, somebody you used to work with at a previous bank, or at a hospital that you know that works in the industry. The third is do it manually first. And I know, as somebody who's a big believer in automation, doing it manually first, though, is not the point. It just helps you understand the process. And do it once, do it twice, do it 10 times manually. Forward a suspicious email to, a couple buddies that you met at Black Hat, whatever it is, start somewhere. And then over time, invest in automation. Write the scripts. Work with API-first tools. That's a big thing for me, is make sure that your tools are interoperable. Don't get caught in vendor lock-in that only works with, this small set of tools. Work with tools with publicly facing APIs. And then the last thing is, once you've started somewhere, you've defined your community and you've joined it or you've created it, you've started manually, you've dipped your toe in the water and manually shared some intel and consumed some intel. And then you've automated using APIs and scripting and integrations or tools, then grow. Pick another slice of data and start the process again. That's how I would sort of guide folks, I guess, on the journey.
Okay. So, Patrick, thank you very much for being with us today. It was a great time having this conversation with you. I want to thank you again for this, and I want to thank also the audience for being with us today, and I want to invite them to join us on Thursday for another great topic to discuss. So I hope we have established the idea to begin with something, Patrick, because I think that's the main goal I will suggest for this meeting. So thank you very much, Patrick, and it was great to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for the work you do.
See you guys.